I'm Nu-Trix, and today we're looking into the P-10 from Cherry Audio. It's a recreation, a virtual recreation of a Prophet-10, which is actually two Prophet-5 in the box plus some. I did own a Prophet-5. I loved the sound of the device. I did get rid of it because it was unstable and it cost a lot to maintain way back. Still, it has a sound that is so recognizable when you know one, when you played with one, that when I played with the P-10, I just went back in time. It was like, oh, that's the sound I remember. Now, the Prophet-5 is a very important synthesizer in the history of synthesizers. And Prophet-10, well, it's two Prophet-5 into one box, plus some features because you're combining them in different ways. This version, of course, being a software version of it, they have features that did not exist on the original one. Of course, why not? Why limit to the original? Let's just keep it alive. So there's much more stuff into this one. There's features that did not exist, and there's actually stuff that is like the sequencer, which is a lot better than the original one that was in the Prophet-10. And there's effects, which was not part of the original synthesizer. And on top of that, you don't have to tune it. You don't have to wait until it's warm up so you can actually play with it and it's stable. And you don't have to maintain it every year. And it has features like velocity, aftertouch, stuff that did not exist on the original P-10 or Prophet-5. So let's just go in and listen to what a Prophet-10 sounds like. First of all, if you want to navigate this, you can always hide the keys and just keep the top here. But then you're also hiding the control here, like upper, lower, and the sequencer. So you get rid of that if you don't. But if you're into just using the brain and you want to use it so it takes less space on your screen, the get rid of the keys is one way to do that. You always have the focus. Now, I find that with my old eyes, I need glasses for this one because a lot of little knobs on this one. And if you still find it difficult to watch, depending on how big your screen is and how bad your eyesight is, you have the focus at the top, which is always useful. And I'll use that because it's easier to really see what we're doing. So the principle of the Prophet-10 is basically two Prophet-5. You have to manage this with two layers. Like if you use a Jupiter, there's a ton of synthesizers that use layers today. But when this came out, it was not something that was obvious and something we saw often. So now you have layers, and in the panel view, you've got upper and lower. So if you click lower or upper, now there's one way to see which one you're in. When you switch that, the color of the button switched to green when you're in lower, and upper, you see they're red instead. So easily you can switch between them and know which one you're in. If you just want to hear one, you press solo layer, and the one that is selected here, you'll hear. Now I'm saying that because there's actually many ways to play it. You have the double mode, meaning every time you press a key, you hear the two layers playing. If you look here, you see upper and lower. You see that you have these two playing. And if I change the cutoff on this one, I'm changing it on the upper only. And in the lower, that's the lower, that's the upper in solo mode. When I two together, that's the double. There's normal. Normal basically, if you play the two keyboards separately, you've got two sounds. So you would need two keyboards and having them on two different MIDI channels. Then you have single, and single you only play one. Or basically, you have a Prophet-10. That's what you have. And you have alternate. So this is actually every key you're switching between A or B. So you're going between layer A and B and you're switching. It's actually fun, not always. So it depends on the layers that you have. Now, the next one is something that they added. It wasn't part of the original one. It's the split mode, which is something we see when you have layers in today's synthesizers. The split meaning on the lower side of the key that you have here, C4, is going to be the lower sounds, and the other side, you're going to have the upper layer. And then you can change that to whatever key you want by clicking on it. To single mode for now, so you're just going to hear one, because we're going to talk about the synthesis and how this thing works. On the side here, you have a sequencer. Let's just turn this off to be sure we don't have it. We still have something go, what is it that we have? Well, we have the arpeggiator. There is no arpeggiator anywhere here. But if you look at the screen itself here, the effects in this section here, effects, if you click on it, the whole panel changes. And now we're in effects window. So for each of the layers, you have distortion, phaser, delay, reverb, chorus, flanger. All of this is just for one layer. And then you've got an arpeggiator. And again, the arpeggiator is for each layer separately. So they both can arpeggiate differently. And you have a set of controls. Pressure is for aftertouch, the channel pressure we call it. So channel pressure, and it's a modulation. So as you press it, let's say we're going to turn on distortion. Press on it. You can decide what you want to do for each of these values here by pressure. You can have all of them at the same. You get +5 or -5. We got mono modulation. So this is just modulation that happens using either the LFO or the noise. So you can create weird stuff happening. And you have an LFO dedicated to controlling this. And if you don't want to have the two layers with different sounds or different effects, you want them to go through the same delay, the same reverb, because you want them to sound like it's part of the same room, then you can switch into global. So the both of them will then be mixed before they go to one set of effects instead of having their separate effects. So it's your choice depending on what you want to do. And if you don't want to have effects at all, turn it off. It's not there. So let's go back to synthesis. On the left side is the modulation section. We'll go back to that after. But then we start with the Oscillator 1 section. You got Oscillator A and Oscillator B. Now, A is much more complex. No, it is not. It's simple. You have a frequency, you have a pulse width, and that's it. A, you can change Oscillator A. You have two shapes. And you have the pulse width for the second one. But what's interesting is that you have a little bit more control. You've got fine tuning, you get frequency, but you have sync on Oscillator A because A can sync to B. And B can be also a low frequency. So B can be an LFO if you want to, because when you press low frequency, it becomes very low. My speaker just here pop, 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 so low. And if you turn back, then you're in the audible range again. I mean, the rest is fairly logical. You've got filters, cutoff, resonance, envelope amount, and then you get it as entire envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release, velocity, how much velocity will respond to this, attack, decay, sustain, release for the amplifier with velocity for it. So it's very logical. You have high pass and low pass. Well, the original Prophet-5 did not have a high pass. It was only a low pass, so you have a low pass here. And keyboard, half and full and nothing is how the filter will move the cutoff point as it goes up the keys or not. If you put it that like this, 0, as you go up the keys, the filter will not move. It will stay at the value you have here, this one. But if you put it half, as you go up, it actually opens up. And it closes as you go down. And you put it at full, it opens even more and closes even more. So it follows even more accurately, while actually 1 octave per volt to have this changing. Now, after that, you have basically the panning, the volume, and the layer tuning for that. And then you have an EQ for it. And that's it. I mean, that's how it works. Now you've got droning. If you press drone, you will go attack, decay, sustain, and the sound will stay there. It will stay. If you don't have this, you have release. Without this, release, you would normally use a pedal for this. And as you press the pedal, you control the release time. So you're going attack, release right away. But as you press on the pedal, you're going to control how long the release will be, but then you don't have any sustain. It's actually something that you saw in different synthesizers at the time. I would say use a release and just have the ADSR. That's how I'm used to use this. Let's actually go into what makes a Prophet-5 and 10 stand out. It's the entire modulation section here, and this will bring us to use the sync, the pulse width, and the low frequency. So let's look at what this is. You have an LFO. You have different shapes for it, up, down, triangular, square, randomize. The wheel, which is normally how it works, as you go up the wheel, bring the wheel up, the modulation wheel, it will bring in the LFO, meaning that the original Prophet-5 did not have a LFO amount, so this was not there. To have the LFO active, you needed to push the wheel up. So as you save the patches, it did not save the value of the wheel. So you, depending if your wheel was at different places, you might have LFO or not because it was not saved with the patch. Now in this one, it is saved with the patch, and they have something more, which is the original amount of LFO being sent before you move the modulation wheel. So you can save that, and then the wheel can also work. Key reset is basically when you press the key, will reset the LFO. So it starts always at the same place. I don't like that. I like free roaming LFOs, but that's me. It's just like that. You've got the frequency and you have the sync. So it's just all the values you see and you expect to have. So, but now if you want to hear it, okay, where do you send it? Well, this LFO controls the mono here, the mono modulation. There's also polymodulation and there's pressure modulation. We've talked about pressure, which is basically aftertouch. It's the channel pressure. So this is something that you can use. It wasn't part of the original Prophet-10 or 5. I think the Prophet-8. T was for touch sensitive or the pressure. The mono and the poly are different. Mono is basically, this is one single source of modulation, the LFO, assigned to all of these destinations. So they will all move at the same speed. So if I assign it to the frequency, the pitch, and I want to have okay, everything. If I press 3 keys, that's too much. Let's bring it a little bit lower. So if I press the 3 keys, one after the other, they all have the same speed together. Let's make it slower so it's obvious. Okay, they're doing the same LFO. There's one LFO, 3 notes playing. Now, if I do the same thing with the poly modulation, well, you cannot do that with the LFO because it's a monophonic source. There's only one oscillator doing the low frequency oscillator. But if I use the oscillator B, which is actually an LFO also if I press on low frequency here, but this is a polyphonic source. So it means that every key, if I'm using oscillator B as a source, and I send it to the frequency A, for example, now they have different speed. Let's bring it down in speed so we hear. I can also change the keyboard. They're not working using the same LFO. They all have their own LFO because each key triggers an oscillator B that is an LFO to control oscillator A on the key that is being triggered. So each of them have their own LFO, which is different. It's a polyphonic modulation. And you can have that on frequency, on pulse width, on filter. So it means that if you have a different filter, so this is interesting because if I have this, every key can oscillate with a filter. So they're not at the same place, each of them. That's pretty cool. So that's how it works. And then you can assign it, as I said earlier, to pulse width modulation. Now, one thing that is also cool is the sync. The sync sound that if you don't know what it sounds like, if you turn on the sync, it's basically, you will force oscillator A if you take off, you see you hear all the notes. By having the sync, you're forcing this one to re-trigger his own modulation or his own period of cycle every time this one is hitting a note. So it is forced to be in sync with Oscillator B. So the sound that we like to have is having, example, the filter envelope here, controlling the note of the frequency A. And then let's say we take an attack, a decay, and a low sustain. B now that you hear, that is not a low frequency, then we hear that sound. B is the main body of the note, and A is the movement of the harmonics. So that's one way to understand how this works. You have the filter that can be used to control these things. You have the Oscillator B, and this is a polyphonic modulation. So it means that every key will have its own envelope. Every key will have its own LFO, because that's what polyphonic is for here. Whereas this one is the monophonic modulation. That's it. It's just a fun sounding. If you like the sound of the Prophet-5, Prophet-10, it sounds really like what it is. Now the sequencer in it, I'm not going to talk about it. It's part of, they took it from another synthesizer. It used to be in the Elka, if I'm not mistaken. So go watch the Elka videos to know more about the sequencer, but it's a 4-sequence sequencer, and it can be assigned to upper or lower. So it's a great piece of software. I like the sound. In my case, it reminds me of a great past of playing with the Prophet-5. So I'm going to have to load this one often, I think. That's it. Stay safe, make more music, and see you soon. Cheers.